Hello, this is my third and final video on chapter 4 of Berger's Heretical Imperative, which I've entitled Myth and Symbol. So the book came out in 1979, but I think it's still relevant today. So far we've defined what Berger refers to as the reductive possibility, the idea of modernizing tradition by bargaining with modernity and bargaining away mythology, and presenting in particular the translation model. Now we'll move on to a critique of the model and the idea of man as symbolizer and as symbol. Because of his prestige, Bultmann had a major impact on German theologians. Conservatives thought he'd gone too far, but others thought he'd not gone far enough. But interestingly, one of the most thoughtful critiques of his work came from Karl Jaspers, a philosopher, not a theologian. And Jaspers was particularly concerned with the role of mythological language, which for him was in fact needed in modern times just as much as in the past. Thus, through mythological language, man comes to terms with the transcendent dimensions of his existence. Any program to demythologize a religious tradition will thus result willy-nilly in a fundamental impoverishment of thought, that is, a loss of transcendence. In this regard, Bultmann's definition of mythology resembles Peter Berger's definition of religion as a whole. For Berger, the core experience of religion is the interpenetration of another reality which invades or impinges on ordinary reality in some form. To demythologize is to invalidate the religious experience as such. That is what modern secular thought has done. The cosmos has no supernatural, so no world beyond or visitations from that world. Was Bultmann a 19th century positivist? His understanding of modernity was attacked. For Barth, it was simply a matter of idolatry. But for Jaspers, Bultmann had adopted a view of science which was 19th century, a scientism, if you like, not the view of science held in the 20th century. And again, modern men were not the flat, positivistic creatures that Bultmann had imagined. All versions of the translation model share the lack of critical distance. Implicitly, sometimes explicitly, they hold that modern man stands on a cognitive pinnacle from which he can survey and overcome the shortcomings of the past. But whilst for Bultmann, electricity, radio, and medicine have impacted modern consciousness, this doesn't mean that there have been cognitive gains in all areas. For example, we have weakened our relationship to the realm of transcendence. It's doubtful that just using an electric toothbrush or watching television news causes the gods to recede into implausibility. But even if it did, that would be no reason to suppose that moderns had a better understanding, better insight into the world than Socrates, Aeschylus, the Buddha, or the author of the Gospel of John. It's true that modern consciousness is a complicated phenomenon. So yes, it has a secularizing element, but that has a sociological cause, including the reality of pluralism. And it doesn't imply that moderns have an epistemological superiority over the peoples of the past. We can neither absolutize or denigrate modern thought. History generates a succession of structures of consciousness. Each is to be taken seriously and looked at in terms of its possible insights. Modern consciousness is merely one amongst many possible structures. You can't make apodictic statements about what we can no longer believe. Both the sociology of knowledge and historical understanding produce a healthy skepticism about taken for granted certainties. Bultmann has also been criticized, most comprehensively by Jaspers, for a one-sided and pessimistic view of the human condition, a gloomy Heideggerian existentialism, if you will. Many would deny that life was so terrible. Also, a worldview based on angst can be understood in sociology of knowledge terms. Note that a pessimistic bias is also prominent in both the psychotherapeutic and political versions of the translation model, making salvific symbols plausible. Humans, from that standpoint, are beset with crippling neuroses and so desperately need therapy. They are oppressed and alienated and need revolutionary redemption. But if we adopt a more optimistic view of human life, the plausibility of these models collapses. What of the many people who feel neither psychologically crippled nor socially oppressed? They obviously don't understand how bad things really are from this standpoint. They suffer from repression, according to Freud, or false consciousness, according to Marx. Now let's turn to the idea of man as symbolizer and as symbol, and in particular look at the key role played by Ludwig Feuerbach, in particular his essence of Christianity. For Feuerbach, religion was a gigantic projection of human concerns onto the cosmos. Religion was really all about human life, reality, fears, and hopes. Theology was translated into anthropology. References to superhuman realities were reduced to purely human references, effectively a Copernican revolution in the reflection on religion. This was the basis for Marx's view of the human condition, and it profoundly shaped Freud and Nietzsche. It hovers over every program of secularizing the religious view of reality, even by people who have never heard of Feuerbach. Feuerbach cannot be easily dismissed. Over 200 years, the historical, social, and psychological sciences have shown clearly that every religious tradition is full of projections of this worldly human interests. All New Testament literature has its socio-historical location in terms of economic circumstances, emotional frustrations, and collective resentments. Modern scientific study of religion is only possible with these demonstrations of mundane determinants of the supposedly extra-mundane. But even if this is true, that is not the whole story. For example, accounts of a faraway country by returning travelers may be determined by the historical, socioeconomic, and psychological characteristics of the traveler. It's a reflection of the past history of the traveler's own country, the solution to his social problems, the embodiment of his worst fears or best hopes. But none of this denies that it's a real country and that something can be gleaned from his accounts. Marco Polo may have had an Oedipus complex and class resentments, but he visited China. So yes, religion is a symbolization of the human world. The gods symbolize human realities, but that doesn't mean that religious experience isn't real and doesn't exist. From the standpoint of religious experience, the gods are sui generis and the human world a symbol and intimation of the divine. The reductive option can thus be rejected. Thank you for listening. In particular, thank you to my patrons, Sina Fazel, David Langness, Anthony Lee, Ian Palin, Johannes Rosenbaum, Steve Scholl, Ismail Valesco, Tobias Weta, Tricia Williams, Jonah Winters, and Gloria Yazdani. If you want, you're very welcome to support my channel. Like, comment, and share if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll talk about the third, and for Berger, the correct possibility. That's the inductive possibility. And I've entitled that introduction, Back to Schumacher. So have a good day.